Now let's begin with the other part of the chapter, microorganisms and viruses, friend and foe, right? In this video, we are going to talk about the diversity of microorganisms. Diversity of microorganisms. So this we've come to know that what are microorganisms, in which types they are classified as, right? So we have come to the conclusion that there is diversity of microorganisms. So this diversity is actually uh, why is there diversity of microorganisms? See, there we've concluded that the microorganisms come in different shapes and structures, right? So there is some kind of diversity on the basis of shapes and structures. Like some are like rod, some have rod like structures, while some have free structures like this. So there are many structures in which microorganisms are found. So they come in variety of shapes and structures. So another factor which actually adds to the diversity of microorganisms, or another factor which contributes to the fact that there is diversity of microorganisms, that is their habitat. See, microorganisms are found in different habitats. We've talked again and again about this fact that they are found everywhere. They are found in air, water. So they are found in almost everywhere. So that means that some microorganisms can be found in air, while some prefer what aquatic places, aquatic bodies, while they can even live inside the body of some other organism. So you may even find some kind of microorganism dancing inside the intestine of some other animal, or some, or it may also be observed in to be living inside some other plant. So these microorganisms basically live in almost any kind of place. So there is diversity of microorganisms on the basis of their shapes and structures, also on the basis of their habitats. So we've concluded these 2 points, right? Now, if we've talked about microorganisms, we've talked about their habitat, or how there is so much of diversity in them and what they actually are. So this topic basically will not be completed if we do not consider the viruses, which are an exception of these microorganisms. So we actually need to know what viruses are. Why are they basically an exception? Why are viruses an exception? This is the main basic question, main thing that we actually need to know, why viruses are considered to be an exception, right? See, we when we were talking about their classification, we did say that virus can be considered as an example of a microorganisms, but we do not classify them, we do not put them in the classification of microorganisms, right? So viruses were an exception, right? Why it was so? See, it was found that if when as long as a virus remain isolated, as long as a virus remains isolated or alone, it behaves like a non-living thing. It behaves like a non-living thing. So as long as a virus remains isolated or alone, it behaves as a non-living thing. It didn't exhibit, when it was isolated, when a virus was isolated, it didn't exhibit any property which could be considered as a living property. See, it didn't exhibit anything which could classify it as a living organisms. And now we know that viruses are basically, and we know that microorganisms are what they are actually, living organisms which are too small to be seen, right? What are the basic two criteria, with basic two characteristics which are needed in order for a micro for some organism to be a microorganism? See, the first thing that is needed in order to be a microorganism is small size, right? And other thing is that they were considered as living organism, so they need to be living as well. So these were two things which were needed for any organism to be a microorganism: small size and living things. So viruses do basically uh, have this property, right? They are small, we consider them, they are microscopic, right? So they are microscopic. If they are microscopic, then why didn't we put them in the classification? Why didn't we put them in the classification? See, the thing was, even though they did exhibit one property, they when they were isolated, they didn't exhibit the property of a living organisms. When they are isolated, when they are living alone, they do not perform actions like eating, sleeping, or multiplying, which a basic living organism does. So that was the reason why they were basically not included inside the classification, because when isolated they behaved as if they were a non-living thing, as if they weren't living, as if they were just dead. But it was found that as soon as it entered a host, now we do know that microorganisms can basically live inside other organisms as well, right? So this virus also lives inside some other microorganism. For example, let us say that a virus lived inside a bacteria, right? A virus is living inside a bacteria. This bacteria in which your virus is living is basically a host. That organism which welcomes some virus or some other organism is basically a host. This host will basically provide will the required food requirements and the nutrition to the virus. So it was found that as soon as the virus entered some host, it started multiplying, it started reproducing inside the cell. Now this reproduction or multiplicity or replication that the virus was now doing, it was some kind of property which was basically performed by uh, a living organism, right? So now we were at a contradiction. So that means that we cannot actually consider a virus to be completely dead. We cannot call it a dead completely, as it was performing some kind of action which a living thing performed inside the host. So because of this contradiction, your virus is basically considered as an example of a microorganisms. But since they are not actually completely living and not completely dead, we do not basically add them into the classification of microorganisms. So this was the reason why viruses were considered to be an exception. The basic exception was that they exhibited properties of both living and non-living thing. They when they were isolated, they behaved as if they were dead, and only on entering the host only on entering the host, they started a reproduction, multiplied, and actually behaved like as if they were living. So this concludes our discussion about viruses and what these are and why are they an exception. Now, whenever we talk about microbes, also known as microorganisms, we are going to further ahead. We are going to call them as microbes for short. So whenever we talk about microbes, we come to this conclusion that we always come to this conclusion that they are bad. Like whenever I say bacteria or fungi, you're always going to think some negative about them. Your mind will automatically go in that direction and will call them as something negative, something having harmful effect. So yes, and that is to some extent true as well. Because various diseases are actually caused by them. But the question arises now is that, are they always harmful? Is there no is there nothing friendly about them? Do they always cause some kind of bad effect, or they are not helpful? So in this chapter we are actually going to talk about this as well. We are going to talk about various diseases or various harmful effects of microbes, but we are not going to forget about their friendly nature as well. We are going to talk about something good about them as well. So in the next video we are going to actually take up the good part first, and then we will talk about the harmful effects.